Tennessee Senate candidates Phil Bredesen and Marsha Blackburn faced off in their second and final debate on the campus of the University of Tennessee. In a twist, there was no live audience, but plenty turned out and engaged on social media, especially Twitter. WBIR 10 News reporter Shannon Smith gives us a look at what drove spikes in the conversation online tonight. Shannon?
Well, John, a lot of people took to Twitter. By the end of the debate, around 7,500 tweets using the hashtag #TNSenateDebate were tracked by UT's social media command center. As people watched the Tennessee Senate debate inside the Alumni Memorial building on UT's campus, two people sat behind the screen watching the tweets roll in.
There are a little bit over 4,000 tweets in the first 30 minutes of the debate.
Courtney Childers and Brandon Boatwright with UT's Adam Brown Social Media Command Center were analyzing all the debate-themed tweets in real time.
There is a correlation between how people talk about politics online and how they vote. So it's really actually a way for us to potentially predict and to understand how elections might turn out.
Boatwright says they counted an almost equal number of tweets about each candidate using the hashtag #TNSenateDebate.
With each question, we see the keywords change and spikes in both volume and sentiment associated with those keywords.
When the candidates discussed Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, health care, or immigration, the social media team noticed those words pop up more on Twitter.
So Second Amendment has just popped up. So hashtag 2A is...
And they noticed tweets about the candidates were split between positive, negative, and neutral. Post-debate, both candidates shared a similar message about why they're the best choice.
I am running to take Tennessee values to Washington, D.C. and put them to work, getting the things done that Tennesseans want to see done.
I just walked away from tonight feeling that, that nothing was going to change unless you start, I think, changing some of the people, and that's why I'm running for this office.
Boatwright says the hashtags also sparked conversation between Twitter users, growing the reach of this debate across social media nationwide. John?
Shannon Smith with that perspective. Thank you.